Hello. Today, of course, I think I have to speak about the impact of the crisis in Ukraine on global economy. Well beyond the humanitarian impact, and of course, without talking about the human drama, I'm going to focus on the impact of the sanctions and of the situation on inflation and on the world economy. Globally, for the moment, the consensus is that the impact will be relatively minor on the global economy, only 0.3%, something like that. However, it's very different per region, and the impact will be, of course, massive on Russia, Belarus, but also on some other countries, while it is not expected to affect really the Northern America, so America and Canada. Russia corresponds more or less to the economy of Spain. So it's a relatively modest economy, but it's predominant in some production. Of course, oil and gas, especially delivered in Europe, but also in agricultural products and mainly wheat. Together, Ukraine and Russia are major providers of wheat, but also of other agricultural goods as sunflower and all the byproducts, so sunflower, oil, seeds, and so on. What we see now is that prices may go up very massively in all countries importing those goods. So we have a number of countries that are extremely dependent, and that's mainly around the Mediterranean Sea. So we have Northern Africa, MENA, Middle East countries, and Turkey. In all these countries, we could see very high inflation, and the impact could be very important on the population. Just a reminder that the Arab Spring has been beginning because of very high food prices. And we could have, again, social unrest in countries like Tunisia, Egypt, extremely dependent on Ukraine and Russia, but also in Turkey. Countries that have the means to provide subsidies to the food prices will do it. All the Gulf countries will have to support the prices. That's the only way for them to get out of this crisis. This will also raise prices in Europe very significantly. Besides, we have also higher prices, of course, for hydrocarbons, but also for a number of metals, including precious metals or rare ones. And that will affect production of a number of goods. This shock to the inflation comes at the same time when we expect the Fed to tighten its monetary policy, because the inflation in the US is really increasing rapidly as well, with the last figure at 7.9%. I think that the US are not directly impacted by what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, but nevertheless, because the high idiosyncratic level of inflation, they will tighten the monetary policy, and they will do it quite strongly, probably 5 times this year. The ECB will be much more cautious before following that, and probably will delay because of the crisis in Ukraine. But nevertheless, at a moment, the inflationary pressure will be too high, and they will have to hike as well. The advantage for some emerging markets is that they have been hiking already last year or at the beginning of this year, and they are in a better position. Nevertheless, we have a global shock again on growth through the inflation at a time when growth was not yet really strong, and we have an increasing risk back of stagflation somehow. So high inflation, measures to fight against inflation, and no growth or not enough growth. The crisis in Ukraine also adds to the disruptions in supply chains. Russia is not that much related in the supply chains of the world, except for some goods, and especially for metals and a lot of precious metals and rare metals that are used in different components of high-tech products. However, the war there is also disrupting very severely the shipping lines. And we have there, again, a shock to the supply chains. There is a risk of, on all goods, in fact, because the reorganization around Europe will have to take place. At the same time, in China, we could still have risks on supply chains for a very different reason. China remains extremely severe on its COVID policy. it's still a zero COVID policy. So we could have production sites, cities closed, and with the production of some specific goods affected again. Ports closed, affecting the whole supply chain. So we have, again, when we were just getting out of the previous crisis, we have now again a new crisis with exactly the same impacts: inflation, supply chains. As I was mentioning earlier, my major fears are around Middle East, sorry, but also in Africa, where we see some countries very dependent on their imports of agricultural goods. Some countries can partially offset that worldwide. So the two major potential production of wheat are India, that could export more as well, and France. In both cases, the difficulty will not only be to produce more, but also to export more and to have the right routes for exports. Finally, we see that China will probably benefit somehow of all this situation. They're certainly negotiating good prices for their imports of wheat from Russia and imports of all goods. However, their relationship with Russia put them in a difficult position because somehow it's isolating it as well from the rest of the world. In conclusion, this crisis and this war will have longer impact than what we expected before the crisis, and it will have a long impact on the world economy. It will change fundamentally some production. It will reorganize structure around Russia relationship. It will reorganize, of course, the dependency on hydrocarbons of a number of countries. I think that even in a very optimistic scenario of Russia retreating and stopping the war, the sanctions will remain and will continue to affect profoundly the relationships of Russia with the rest of the world, and especially with Europe. Thank you very much.